thanks for including West Neighbourhood House in this discussion. West Neighbourhood House, formerly known as St. Christopher House, is a multi-service neighbourhood centre, proud member of Toronto Neighbourhood Centres and the Canadian Association of Neighbourhood Services and even the International Federation of Settlements. Our mission is to enable people to gain greater control of their lives and over their communities. And more recently, our mission statement still stands, but Robin's been helping us with our theory of change, so we're also committing to a shorter version, which is personal change and social change work together. I'd like to start with just a bit of an overview, but mostly disclaimers. I'm not going to be using lots of case studies, but I did want to make sure folks knew that any of my negative references today aren't referring to the wonderful partnership we had that we're probably most well known for with David Hilchansky and the team at the City Centre on neighbourhood change. And that resulted in the 3 cities report that's been on the Globe and Star front pages many times. So that was a wonderful community academic partnership. And so we learned many lessons out of that. But we've also had other experiences and have witnessed other experiences that have been less than great between academics and community working together. So my effort today is to try to improve the impact of our work together. We both, I think academics and community, care about the communities we're looking at. And so we have a good starting point already. I think there's a perceived problem that we're not seen to be very credible. And I think there's some notable exceptions, but many of the audiences that we think are important maybe don't think we're very credible. And I feel like we're challenged a lot about our credibility. West Neighbourhood House is not a research shop. We're more like, as Excel referred to, we work with academics, we work with researchers on project-specific pieces, but we are very committed to public policy. And that's what's driving our work, is public policy change. So because we get challenged about credibility, we feel we need to be very critical and self-critical. We absolutely have a role in the problem, while appreciating that there are good reasons why our credibility falls down sometimes. And again, I really do want to emphasize we were very fortunate to be working with a wonderful team at the City's Centre and learned some good things there. So I think Kim's talked about it, Excel's talked about it. There is an assumption that because academics want to work with community and community wants to work with academics, that we have an interest in changing public policy. I was trying to think of examples of where that might not be true, and I'm sure there might be some, but generally I think we're largely trying to do this work to influence the conditions for less advantaged people, and that would lead you to, I think, improving public policy pretty quickly. So what do academics contribute to credibility in terms of public policy development? One is the rigorous methodologies. And I think, Excel, we might have some room here for some debate about the use of gray evidence or gray research and rigor. But it is a problem in our credibility when we do use gray research. The rigor is often seen to be lacking in community and academic partnerships. There's my colleague Diane from Wood Green, I think, is one of the most vocal critics, and I completely share her concern about just because it's in the community doesn't mean that it needs to be less than fully rigorous. So rigor is really important. Academics have an advantage on us in the community because we're seen to sometimes be feathering our own nest as community organizations, talking about the need of the community over and over again. Academics don't have that. There are jobs secure, and so that sense of some objectivity and distance is a helpful thing in terms of credibility. And another big piece is, especially when you don't have researchers on staff, is academics are up to date in knowledge. However, there is a problem around silos, and so come to that in a minute as a problem area. What community organizations do in terms of contributing to credibility is, I think we bring a lot of relevancy to the table. I think we can help identify issues that are meaningful to the community, and that's not only helpful for the community, but it's helpful to engage the political representatives very early on in something. If it's meaningful to the community, you can bet it's meaningful to a political representative. So one of the challenges we sometimes get is who cares? Who cares about this work? Well, being relevant to the community really does help answer that question. Appropriate solutions. I think that community organizations are good often as a screen for what's appropriate, not to be completely controlling a community's response to things, but sometimes we can head off some damage by well-intended research findings that might be translated into a public policy that actually has some negative implications. So just a little bit more of the cumulative lived experience that we've seen at the front line as witnesses can help make sure that there's appropriateness and nuance in using research. Accessibility is a third area, and this is a very large part of public policy development, is making sure the language is clear and accessible. Civil servants and politicians are smart enough, but they don't particularly care for some of the language that academics use. And our community certainly is often feeling lost and left behind with academic reports. So this is the challenge we get is often, what the heck are you talking about? So accessible language is very, very important for that. Now, Hillary did something tricky with me here. What did it? Oh, there it goes. The credibility problems, and I'm trying to pick on both community organizations and academics equally, but if you feel I'm being unfair, please feel free to jump at me. But academics, I've talked with some academics about some of the reluctance we see for them to get engaged in public policy. They'll do the research, but they don't really see their roles going beyond that. So I've really been asking them about that. And it's very clear, especially for younger academics early in their career, there's no incentives for them to get involved beyond the publishing of their research. They may have the best of intentions, but they actually do need to move on to the next project and publish some more. So that's a built-in structural problem in academia that I think is a problem. We do know there's some incentives, and things like the CIFAR fellowships and others are a really good way to round that picture out a bit, but I think we need to see a lot more incentives built in for academics to be involved in the result, moving the results of their research into public policy change. I have a pretty big rant about ideology in community and academic research. I'm going to try to keep that lid down, but there's really yeah, give me a drink. We've been shot down so many times when we're meeting with political representatives or civil servants if anybody mentions the word neoliberal agenda. Now, there is a very valid critique about the neoliberal agenda, but honestly, it is not something that the public really likes to hear about. They think it's code for something else. Certainly politicians and civil servants think that that is a big red flag if you're starting to use that kind of language. So again, I'm not saying there isn't huge validity in a neoliberal critique, but honestly, it is something that falls very flat when you're trying to move public policy forward. It's something that falls very flat on community members usually, and I think we really do need to really watch our language on that. So neoliberal is my pet peeve word, but there are other words, and there's other framing of research and community issues in abstract language that is almost insulting to the intelligence of people, that it could be said actually in much clearer language, and it feels over fancified. The third area is that we believe many academics aren't talking to each other, and increasingly the world, I think, demands that we're multidisciplinary. So Kim, it sounds like your team is 30 people, it sounded like, across disciplines. The other issue that we have is we think that there's not a lot of attention being given to behavioral insights. Almost all community work, we assume, has something to do with human behavior. And there's so many new insights in behavioral economics or social psychology that aren't being well utilized in some fields. So there's a lot of us in the community don't know which faculty to go to find support or research that would be helpful. So I think there's a big area around behavioral insights. And again, it looks like CIFAR is really on top of that. And I think United Way is also very on top of that. We really do need to be getting at some of these new fields that can help explain behavior, can suggest ways that we can get some behavior change, while not letting go of the structural issues that obviously still need to be attended to. Now to pick on, oh,
I think you got a slide ahead of yourself.
yeah. I was going to skip over critiquing the community sector, but I think I better come back to that. So community organizations, Excel has talked about this. We really lack the resources and core skills to produce rigorous research ourselves, with notable exceptions like Access Alliance, Wood Green, Social Planning Toronto, the United Way. There are few that actually do that, and they are doing it at the cost of something else, because they're not getting funding for this generally. It's not just the money, though, for core staff to do it. It's also some of this ability to keep on top of current research or new areas of insight. And that's really demanding, and that's where I think community organizations need to be clear about what we don't know. This is sort of being funny about community workers' distrust, but actually more realistically, they loathe quantitative methodologies, the use of control groups, that kind of stuff. There is a numeracy issue in the general public to begin with, and so our staff reflect that. There really is a huge concern that quantitative methods will miss nuance. However, I think that at the sake of nuance, we've gone so far sometimes that we're missing the quantitative stuff that is possibly going to make the case. So this is, again, this issue of which faculty or which field of expertise do you use? Can we get some quantitative stuff and some qualitative stuff working together better? It's really important, and it's a huge part of the credibility problem I think we have. And many community organizations I think believe that, okay, the report's been published academically, there we go, now the world will know. And it's really not true. Many community organizations think that that it's sufficient to just have this research being done. And that's what I think we're really concerned about, the drop-off that happens after research is done. There isn't a lot moving on to the public policy development. So how do we make use of our respective resources? And speaking with some academics about this, we had a really interesting conversation about some of the steps for making evidence-based public policy changes. So my suggestion, and it's very much open to debate, is identifying the issue and the research question and the appropriate researchers maybe is led by the community organization, clearly needs academic help, especially in identifying appropriate researchers. But I think the community organizations are the ones who really need to drive what is meaningful for the community to be researched. The research, I think, is squarely in the hands of academics. If they can use peers and community members wisely and appropriately, that's all the better. But this seems to be an appropriate lead for researchers. Engaging people most affected through the whole process, I think we both have obligations for that. And it means some adjustments for academics, and it means some adjustments for community organizations to meaningfully keep the community engaged as they see fit through these processes. And then from 4 on is where I think we see things have dropped off. And I'm suggesting that we really need to pay attention now from 4 to 7. Those steps are often missing in public policy development coming out of community-based research or community and academics working together on a community issue. Disseminating the research results and doing public education, the need for clear language and design, the need for us all to be working with, contracting out if necessary, to someone who can clad a research document. So clear language and design is a skill in and of itself, and a lot of people don't have that skill. In our sector or in academia, it's really well worth contracting that out and doing it in the form of a briefing note that can be given over to civil servants and politicians. Engaging the public and champions and decision makers. I think community organizations are well placed to be the lead on that because we have mass in terms of community members. We have some heft there that might carry some more weight, but we do need champions, and I would include academics as champions as well there. We need help monitoring implementation of any public policy changes, and celebrating appropriately and letting people know when there are positive changes, which we almost never do, and also re-strategizing when there's news about setbacks in public policy development or failures. And I think that's something that none of us are doing enough of, is monitoring public policy implementation, and we both have an obligation to do that. And then finally, evaluating the outcomes over some period of time, I would say, and suggest that that is an academic responsibility, with community organizations continuing to do it as well. So bottom line, I think that maybe we could be talking more about a different way of working together, a new kind of partnership between academics and community organizations, with the explicit goal of public policy change, not the explicit goal of let's just see what's going on in the community, but it's to drive through to the end of the process to say there should be some changes and improvements in public policy. I think we all need to acknowledge we have a shared responsibility for credibility. We need to be checks and balances on each other. There's a real, I think, mistake in many community organizations that academics are the smart ones. Well, academics can be very smart. Academics have education on their side. But community members, there's a tremendous amount of smarts there too. And I think that there's a reluctance to challenge academics that's really ridiculous. And we do have to get a little bit more confident about our own smarts. And we need to challenge each other, because ultimately we're going to be challenged somewhere else. So we really do need to make sure we're clear about our work, where it's relevant work, the nuance is there, and to respond to what would the critics say. So before we go out with anything, let's do a test of what would other stakeholders with some vested interest against our vision, what would they say, and work through that. And then finally, I think using, just continuing to commit to each other that we'll respect each other's complementary roles and work together, but also let the academics do what they do best and let the community do what they do best, all the while working together and in cooperation. So that's my, my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions or challenges.
All right, so let's open it up. I just want to say thank you for, I think, what is a very thoughtful and balanced and also solutions-oriented presentation and approach. I think you've given a lot of concrete suggestions on both how to leverage credibility better on both sides, but also some practical and specific ways that academics and community could work more closely together. So let's spend some time now, but also later in the smaller groups, digging specifically into some of these suggestions on what would it take for this paradigm to shift? What would it take to have more wins and more concrete examples like we're hearing of today of these successful relationships and partnerships? So let's open it up. Any, yep, please. Great, what's your name?
Good morning. Thank you, Maureen. This question's for Maureen and for Excel. I'm Mark Campbell from NIA Center for the Arts. Have, in your 10-year experience of community research and from your experience at St. Christopher House, have there been wins in terms of public policy change that has been celebrated both with your team and on the academic side? Because I know as a metric in universities, social policy change is not necessarily at the top of the list if it has nothing to do with tuition fees and headcounts and funding of students. So maybe if either of you can respond to that, that'd be great.
We've done some public policy work without academics. The Modernizing Income Security for Working Age Adults had very minimal academic presence in it, but it did have some researchers, policy analysts. And there were some wins out of that. The Ontario Child Benefit is one of them. The Working Income Tax Benefit is another. They're not perfect solutions, and we can't claim all the credit for them, but certainly we feel the mobilizing effort that we did with some of the research. So there's a common database that no one disputed. Multiple stakeholders, including very, very conservative folks as well as activists, people with lived experience, agreed on. It was very powerful. The politicians, in a way, couldn't say no. So that's concrete, but it's not. That wasn't really out of a community university alliance. The Neighborhood Change project with David Holchansky and the large academic team there, we haven't seen obviously the kind of changes we would like to see. certainly the public attention is on the issue of increased income inequality and how it plays out geographically. I still don't think that's a win. I don't think we should give up yet on that, because we haven't, just getting more publicity is not, in my view, a win at all. But Axel, do you have other examples?
We take credit for a lot of things. So, I mean, years ago, the first research project we did, which was looking at needs and issues related to immigrants and refugees in the shelter system. And you might remember, Maureen, years and years ago, there was, and we were actually really strategic about engaging with the city. And there was at that time a funding response related to making language interpretation available to shelters, which previously hadn't been, putting settlement workers in shelters. And then there were a couple of other sort of less sort of servicey but more policy. I think there was a change or a revision of training for shelter workers. And I mean, we did the research work, and then we created all of these working groups with community members and staff, which led to all of this. But I think that's an example of sort of a service focus. We like to think that we were the first ones to start talking about precarious employment, and now it's on the world's radar.
I think you're right.
So, yeah, we wouldn't be able to continue this work if we didn't have some successes, but we could do a better job for sure of talking about them and building on them.